Today's story is one that reminds us all of the fine line between youthful curiosity and outright danger. It's an experience shared by a Reddit user who, at 17, was just starting to explore the world in the way only a teenager can, recklessly, boldly, and without a thought for what might be lurking in the shadows. I was 17 and had just gotten my license. For me, that license was more than a piece of plastic. It was freedom. It was the ability to go anywhere, explore anything, and do it all with my friends. Back in high school, my friends and I had this, let's call it a tradition. We'd look for abandoned houses. Think about that. You're 17, your entire world feels like it's just opening up, and now you have the keys to your own adventure. For OP and their friends, those adventures weren't just about joyrides, they were missions. Missions to find the perfect spot. But not just any spot. A spot that had a story, a vibe, a mystery. There's something irresistible about abandoned places, isn't there? They spark your imagination. You start to wonder, who lived here? Why did they leave? What secrets are hidden behind those walls? For OP and their friends, these were more than just idle thoughts. They were invitations. We'd found a few good places before, but nothing that really stood out. You know, places that were just, okay, a little creepy, a little cool, but nothing that made you think, this is it. Until I started noticing this one house, and there it is, the hook. The one house that catches your eye. The kind of place that calls to you, even when you're not looking for it. OP described it as massive. A looming shell of a house that seemed almost unfinished. The kind of structure that made you think, what happened here? Why does it feel like it's been frozen in time? OP spotted the house while driving home from work. It wasn't just a one-time thing. Day after day, they'd pass it, and every time it seemed to beckon. It was huge, like something out of a movie. The kind of house you'd imagine as a millionaire's dream, but it was completely unfinished. Just this big, empty shell sitting on a large property. The weeds were overgrown, the driveway cracked, but there was something about it that made me keep looking. Can you picture it? The headlights illuminating the cracked pavement, the dark outline of the house against the evening sky. For most people, it would have been enough to glance and move on, but for OP, it became a fixation. Of course, when you're 17, secrets are hard to keep, especially ones that feel as exciting as this. So, OP did what anyone would do. They told a friend. I couldn't stop thinking about it, so one day I told one of my friends. Let's call him Mike. Mike was the kind of guy who was always up for an adventure. If I said, let's go explore a haunted forest, he'd already have the flashlights packed. Mike sounds like the perfect partner in crime, right? Someone who shares your curiosity, who's just as eager to push boundaries. Together, they made a plan. A simple one at first. Just drive by, check it out, and see if it was worth a closer look later. The night they chose to go scouting was a summer evening, that magical time of year when the air feels alive with possibility. OP recalls the details vividly. It was dusk, that weird in-between time where it's not quite dark but not really light anymore. The sky was this mix of orange and purple, and everything just felt surreal, like we were stepping into a story that hadn't been written yet. You can almost feel the energy, can't you? The kind of night where the world feels bigger than it is, where the ordinary becomes extraordinary. But beneath that excitement, there was an edge, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, they were about to step into something they couldn't control. They approached the house cautiously, headlights cutting through the growing darkness. And there it was, the mother lode. We pulled into the front of the house, and for a moment neither of us said anything. It was just there. Massive, empty, and completely still. The property behind it stretched out into the distance, disappearing into the trees. It looked like something out of a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Think about that silence, that heavy charged moment where you're taking it all in. The house wasn't just a building, it was a question, a challenge. And OP and Mike were ready to answer it. Or so they thought. They stayed there for only a few seconds, 10, maybe 15 tops. But even in that short time, something shifted. That initial excitement, it started to curdle, turning into unease. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the way the house just loomed over us, or the way the trees seemed to close in around the property. But I felt it, the urge to leave, and I think Mike felt it too because he just looked at me and said, "Let's go." And so, they left. But not without a lingering sense of tension, like they'd stirred something they shouldn't have. As they drove away, OP couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't done with them. There's a certain kind of pull that places like this have, a magnetic force that keeps drawing you back, even when you know better. I kept thinking, what if we stayed longer? What if we got out of the car? Would we have found something? Or would something have found us? And that, dear listeners, is the power of the unknown. It plants questions in your mind, questions that keep you up at night. For OP and Mike, those questions were just beginning. OP and his friend Mike had left the house. They'd driven away into the growing darkness, headlights bouncing along the road trying to shake off the unease that had crept over them. But the house, it stayed with them. The weird thing was, even after we left, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd be lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and my mind would go right back to that house. It was like it had planted itself there, refusing to let me move on. And Mike, he wasn't much better. The next day at school, they couldn't stop talking about it, going over every little detail like detectives piecing together a mystery. We started obsessing over it, trying to figure out why it was so unfinished. Like, who builds a massive house like that and then just stops? Did something happen? And what about the property behind it? It went on forever. What if there was more back there? Something we didn't see. The more they talked, the more the house transformed in their minds. It wasn't just a structure anymore, it was a puzzle, a challenge, a dare. And for two teenagers with more curiosity than caution, there was only one logical next step. It started small. Mike was like, "What if we went back?" I laughed at first, but deep down I knew I wanted to. I mean, how could I not? The house was like an itch I couldn't scratch. That's how it always starts, doesn't it? The what-ifs, the justifications, the tiny little thoughts that grow and grow until they're impossible to ignore. To add fuel to the fire, it was summer, a season that practically demands adventure. The kind of warm nights where the air feels alive, and the world seems to whisper, "Come on, just one more adventure." I think that's part of why we couldn't let it go. Summer had this way of making everything feel bigger and more important. Like, if we didn't do it now, we'd lose our chance forever. And that sense of urgency, it pushed them forward. By the end of the day, they'd made up their minds. They were going back to the house. Not for long, of course, just a quick visit, a closer look. Nothing crazy, at least that's what they told themselves. But no good teenage adventure happens with just two people. OP and Mike decided to bring a third friend into the mix, a guy we'll call Sam. Sam was, how do I put this? He was fearless. The kind of guy who'd walk into a haunted house alone just to prove a point. We figured if anyone could keep things from getting too scary, it was him. With Sam on board, the plan started to feel more real. They picked a night, gathered supplies, flashlights, snacks, and of course their phones for video evidence, and hyped each other up until there was no turning back. But as the day approached, OP started to have doubts. Something about the house lingered in his mind, not just the way it looked, but the way it felt. Like it was watching them, waiting. I kept replaying that first visit in my head. The silence, the way the property stretched out into the dark. It didn't feel right, but at the same time I couldn't let it go. It was like I had to go back even if I didn't want to. That's the thing about fear. It has a way of pulling you in, even when every instinct is telling you to run. And for OP, the pull was stronger than the push. Finally, the night arrived. The three friends piled into OP's car, nerves buzzing, excitement crackling like static in the air. The drive to the house was filled with the kind of chatter that only teenagers can have, loud, confident, and completely oblivious to what might be waiting for them. We were hyping each other up, making stupid jokes about ghosts and serial killers. But the closer we got, the quieter it got in the car. By the time we turned onto the road where the house was, you could hear a pin drop. And that silence, it only made the house seem bigger, darker, and more imposing as it came into view. They parked a little farther away this time, just to be safe. Flashlights clicked on, cutting through the night, and the three of them made their way toward the house. It felt different this time. I don't know why, but the air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on us. Even Sam, who never gets scared, was quieter than usual. We all felt it, but they didn't stop. The house loomed closer and closer, its jagged edges silhouetted against the night sky. And then, they were there, standing in front of it once again. OP and his friends were determined to explore, but as they stood in the shadow of the house, something changed. A noise. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. At first I thought I imagined it. It sounded like, I don't know, footsteps, but it was so faint I wasn't sure. I looked at Mike and Sam to see if they'd heard it too, but they just shrugged. And here's the thing about noises like that, they burrow into your mind. Even if you don't think you're scared, your body knows better. The hairs on your arms stand up, your pulse quickens, and suddenly, every little sound feels amplified. Despite the noise, they pressed on, moving closer to the house. They shone their flashlights through the open windows, scanning the empty interior, but no matter where they pointed the beams, it felt like the darkness was winning. It was weird. The house looked empty, but it didn't feel empty. Like, you know, when you can just sense someone's there? That's how it felt. Like we weren't alone. And that's the hook, isn't it? That feeling of being watched, of being just a little too exposed. It's enough to make you want to run. But OP and his friends weren't ready to give up, not yet. Just as they were starting to debate whether to go inside, a new noise shattered the silence. This time there was no mistaking it. It was the sound of an engine. A low, rumbling growl, getting closer and closer. My heart dropped. We all froze, just standing there like deer in headlights. The rumble got louder and then we saw it, a pair of headlights coming down the road, and they were headed straight for us. In that moment, every ounce of bravado disappeared. This wasn't just some spooky story anymore. This was real. The three of them scattered, ducking behind bushes and trees, trying to make themselves invisible. The truck pulled up to the house, its headlights sweeping across the property. OP could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to stay perfectly still. I was crouched behind this bush, barely breathing, and all I could think was, whoever's in that truck, they're not here for a friendly chat. And just like that, the plan had fallen apart. What started as a simple adventure had turned into something far more dangerous. So there they were, three teenagers hiding in the dark, a truck looming in the driveway, and a house that suddenly didn't seem so empty. What would you do? Stay hidden? Try to run? Or face whatever or whoever was waiting? At this point, OP and his friends thought they were just on a harmless teenage adventure, scoping out an abandoned house that seemed ripe for exploration. But the stakes had changed. A truck had appeared out of nowhere, its headlights cutting through the darkness, and now the three of them were frozen in place, hidden among the shadows. This was no longer just about curiosity. It was about survival. Let's set the scene. Three teenagers, crouched low, hearts pounding, watching as this truck slowly pulls into the driveway of the unfinished house. The rumble of its engine filled the night air, drowning out the usual summer sounds. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just that ominous, steady hum. We couldn't see who was inside, but we didn't need to. The truck itself was intimidating enough, one of those big lifted trucks with off-road tires and floodlights mounted on top. It was the kind of vehicle that screamed, "Don't mess with me." And in that moment, every rational thought they'd had about this being a harmless visit vanished. The truck wasn't just parked there. It was blocking the driveway, cutting off their only route of escape. The friends exchanged silent, panicked glances, trying to decide what to do. Run, stay hidden, confront whoever was in the truck. Every option felt like a gamble. I could barely breathe. My legs were cramping from crouching so long, but I didn't dare move. I kept thinking, what if they have a gun? What if they're already looking for us? And the worst part, I couldn't tell if they'd seen us or not. That uncertainty, whether or not they'd been spotted, was enough to paralyze them. They weren't dealing with a spooky old house anymore. They were dealing with someone who might be dangerous. And then, it happened. The truck's engine cut off, and the driver's door opened with a metallic creak. The sound echoed in the stillness, sending chills down their spines. We couldn't see much, but we heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, crunching on the gravel. Whoever this was, they weren't in a hurry. It was like they knew they had all the time in the world. Step by step, the stranger moved closer to the house. The tension was unbearable. Every second felt like an eternity, and every sound seemed magnified. The rustle of leaves, the occasional scrape of a boot against the ground. And then, finally, they saw him. A hulking figure, broad-shouldered and tall, stepping into the beam of the truck's headlights. He was wearing a faded baseball cap, a plaid shirt, and jeans. But it wasn't his clothes that stood out, it was his presence. This guy was massive, like linebacker massive. And he didn't just look strong, he looked like the kind of person who wouldn't hesitate to use that strength if he needed to. I remember thinking, this is not someone you want to mess with, and yet there they were, messing with him, even if unintentionally. The stranger paused, scanning the area like he was searching for something, or someone. What happened next was enough to make their blood run cold. The man reached into the truck and grabbed a flashlight. It wasn't a small one. It was one of those big, industrial ones that could light up an entire field. He switched it on, and the beam cut through the night like a knife. He started sweeping the flashlight across the property, slow and deliberate. It passed over the house, the trees, the bushes where we were hiding. Every time it got closer to us, I felt like my heart was going to explode. Imagine that, the light creeping closer and closer, your body frozen in fear, every instinct screaming at you to run but knowing you can't. That was OP and his friends in that moment. And then just as suddenly as it started, the light stopped. It was aimed directly at the bush where OP and his friends were hiding. I don't know if he actually saw us or if it was just dumb luck, but he started walking toward us. I could hear his boots crunching on the gravel, getting louder and louder. Mike whispered, "We need to go now." But I couldn't move. None of us could. It was fight or flight, or in this case, freeze. And they were frozen solid, watching as the man came closer and closer. But just when they thought they were about to be caught, something surprising happened. The man stopped, turned, and headed back toward the truck. He didn't say a word, didn't make any sudden moves. He just left. It was the weirdest thing. 1 second, he was right there, and the next, he was climbing back into his truck like nothing happened. He sat there for a minute, just sitting in the driver's seat with the engine off. It was like he was waiting for something. Waiting for what? That was the question. And the answer would come sooner than they expected. The man finally started his truck and backed out of the driveway. Relief washed over the group, but it didn't last. As they started to creep out of their hiding spots, the truck's headlights swung back toward them. The man hadn't left. He was circling back. We panicked. All three of us just bolted, running as fast as we could toward the road. I could hear the gravel crunching behind us, the truck speeding up. My car was parked a few blocks away, and all I could think was, we have to make it there. Picture the chaos, flashlights swinging wildly, feet pounding against the ground, and the roar of the truck's engine growing louder and louder. It was a race, and they were running for their lives. Somehow, against all odds, they made it to OP's car. They scrambled inside, hands shaking, hearts racing, and OP fumbled with the keys as the truck's headlights loomed closer. I don't think I've ever moved so fast in my life. The second the engine started, I floored it, pulling onto the road just as the truck reached us. And of course, it followed. That's right, the man wasn't done with them yet. He was right on their tail, his high beams blinding them as they sped down the road. At the first intersection, OP made a quick right turn, hoping to lose the truck. But the man was one step ahead. He cut through a gas station and blocked their path, his truck screeching to a halt just inches from their car. It all happened so fast. 1 second we were trying to get away, and the next, he was there standing outside our car. He was knocking on my window, and I didn't know what to do. Mike was freaking out, yelling, "Don't roll it down!" But I did. It's hard to blame OP. When you're that scared, logic goes out the window, sometimes literally, and what happened next would haunt them for years. The man leaned in, his face illuminated by the glow of the headlights. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about the way he carried himself that sent chills down their spines. He asked, "What were you doing at the house?" His voice was calm, almost friendly, but it didn't match the situation. I panicked and blurted out the first thing I could think of. We were making a U-turn. And then he smiled. Not a warm, reassuring smile, but something cold, calculated, and deeply unsettling. He nodded, stepped back, and said, "Be careful out there." With that, he got back into his truck and drove away, leaving OP and his friends sitting there, shaking and silent. They'd escaped, but the memory of that night would stay with them forever. What was the man's deal? Was he protecting the house, hiding something, or was he just toying with them? One thing was clear: they'd never look at abandoned houses the same way again. By now, OP and his friends had experienced enough to realize that their innocent adventure had turned into something much darker. What started as a simple curiosity about an abandoned house had escalated into a tense standoff with a stranger whose motives were as mysterious as they were menacing. Now, as they drove away from the scene, hearts still pounding, a single question hung in the air. What was that man hiding? After the confrontation with the man in the truck, OP and his friends didn't waste any time. They sped away, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. But even as the distance between them and the house grew, the tension didn't ease. We didn't talk at first. The car was completely silent except for the sound of the engine and our breathing, which was still coming fast and shallow. I think we were all trying to process what had just happened. It didn't. But here's the thing about danger: it doesn't always kill curiosity. Sometimes it feeds it. For OP and his friends, the fear of the unknown was matched only by their need to know the truth. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Even after we'd calmed down, even after everyone else went home, my mind kept going back to that house. What was he doing there? Why was it still unfinished? And why did he care so much that we were there? These were questions without answers. And sometimes, unanswered questions are the most dangerous kind. That night, as OP lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a thought struck him. What if this wasn't just about the house? What if the man wasn't just protecting something? What if he was hiding something? I started thinking about the way he smiled, the way he let us go so easily. It didn't make sense. If he wanted us gone, why not scare us more? Why not make sure we wouldn't come back? It was like he wanted us to leave, but also wanted us to remember him. And that's where the real fear set in. Because once you start questioning someone's motives, it's hard to stop. Every detail becomes significant. Every interaction takes on new meaning. The next day, OP and his friends met up again, still buzzing from the events of the night before. But this time their excitement was tempered by something new. Caution. We can't go back, I mean it. Whatever's going on there, it's not worth it. I nodded, but Sam didn't look convinced. He was quiet, which was weird for him. Finally he said, "What if we already saw something we weren't supposed to? What if that's why he let us go?" And there it was. The thought that had been lingering in the back of their minds, unspoken until now. What if they hadn't just stumbled onto something strange? What if they'd stumbled onto something dangerous? Despite their fear, there was still a part of them that wanted to go back, to figure out what was really going on, to solve the mystery that had been haunting them since that first drive by the house. But in the end, caution won out. We decided to leave it alone. No more late-night drives, no more creeping around. It wasn't worth it. Whatever was happening at that house, it was someone else's problem, not ours. It was the smart choice, the safe choice, but it wasn't an easy one. Because some questions are meant to be left unanswered, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. Even after they made their decision, the house stayed with them. Every now and then, they'd bring it up, reliving the events of that night, trying to make sense of what had happened. I still think about it sometimes. That house, that man, the way he smiled at us. It's been years and I still can't figure it out. Was it drugs? Something illegal? Or was it something worse? And that's the thing about fear, it doesn't always fade. Sometimes it lingers, it grows, it becomes a story you tell yourself over and over, trying to find the ending that will let you sleep at night. In the end, OP and his friends chose to walk away. But the memory of that house, that man, that night, they never really left. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Curiosity might lead you to the edge of the unknown, but it's fear that makes you look back, even years later. What was the man hiding? Why was the house unfinished? And what might have happened if OP and his friends hadn't left when they did? We may never know, but one thing is certain, some places are abandoned for a reason. The man leaned in, and the question he asked sent chills down OP's spine. He asked us what we were doing at the house. Without thinking, I lied and said we were making a U-turn. He just stared at us for a few seconds, then smiled this strange, unsettling smile. Smiling can be reassuring, but not this kind of smile. This was the kind of smile that stays with you, the kind that makes your stomach drop. The man said nothing else. He just let them go. OP and his friend didn't waste any time. They got out of there as fast as they could. But the experience left its mark. To this day, the house is still unfinished. I can't help but think, was that place some kind of drug operation? Whatever it was, I'm just glad we didn't stick around to find out. And so, the story ends, not with answers, but with more questions. The house is gone, but its mysteries remain, lingering in the minds of those who dared to get too close. For OP, it's a reminder of the lesson he learned all those years ago. Some places aren't abandoned, they're waiting. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away. And so, the story ends. Not with answers, but with more questions. The house is gone, but its mysteries remain, lingering in the minds of those who dared to get too close. For OP, it's a reminder of the lesson he learned all those years ago. Some places aren't abandoned, they're waiting. And sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away.